Hi everyone, Professor Hosmer here. As promised, I wanted to give you an example of how to use PrettyTable, which is already installed in the VLE as a third-party Python library. And we use this a lot because it allows us to actually create a little bit more decorative tables, but also allows us to sort those tables. I'm going to show you that in this particular example. So I'm going to step through the example line by line for you, and then just to walk you through each of the steps of this process. So I created a very simple real script that will actually allow us to exercise the table. So I'm going to go ahead and just set a breakpoint right here before I import the PrettyTable, because it's kind of a slightly fancier import statement than you have seen before. And let me go ahead and run the script. It's going to stop right at that first line. So this import statement is a little bit different. It's from PrettyTable, import PrettyTable. So I really only want to import the PrettyTable function or method that's going to create an object of PrettyTable. PrettyTable does other things, and I'm only interested in using the PrettyTable module within the PrettyTable library, so that's how I did that. So notice the syntax there, so don't get too confused. But it allows me to actually use the PrettyTable without having to say PrettyTable.PrettyTable. So it just allows me to actually call that directly. So we're going to import that library. I'm also going to import the OS library because I'm going to use it in a couple different ways here, which is really the file system library that's available cross-platform, and that's a standard library from Python. So what I'm going to do is, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a table object. And when you create the table object, you also can create the headings that are going to go in the table. So this table is only going to have two headings and two columns: file path and file size. And so I've labeled them as such. They're important because we're going to use those later. When we actually sort the table, we can pick any of those to sort the table by. So when I create the table, if I put my cursor over that, it's just going to tell me that it's a PrettyTable object. That's all I've done so far. I'm going to create a local variable called dir, which is going to include the directory that I want to scan. Obviously, you can go ahead and change this, or you could prompt the user for this, that kind of thing. But in this case, I'm just hard coding it within the script to kind of keep the script simple for you. So now what I'm going to use is I'm going to use the OS library, the listdir method, in order to be able to get the list of entries that are in that particular directory, // So when I do that, if I put my cursor over file list now, it's going to give me all of the names of the entries within that. Now those are going to include not only files, but also potentially directories, links, all of that kind of stuff. So I'm only interested in the files here, so you'll see what I want to be able to do. So now what I'm going to do is, we've done dozens of times before, I'm going to iterate through the list. You notice I enabled this file list, so I know that that's a list. I'm going to iterate through each entry in the list, and I'm going to say for each file in file list, so again, that it sounds like English. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to convert that simple file name, which in this case is $recyclebin the first time through the loop. I'm going to convert it into a full path, and I'm going to do that by joining the directory with the file name. And when I do that, if I put my cursor over file path now, it's going to show me that the path is $$recyclebin, the full path of that particular file name, right? So I can use it. So now what I want to do is, I only want to process, when I'm looking for the file path and file size, I only want to process actual files. So I'm going to use the OS library again, path.isFile, and I'm going to pass it the file path. In this case, this time through the loop, it was $recyclebin. I'm going to take a look and make sure that it's a file. So in this case, you notice it's not. So the if returned false. That's why it didn't fall into this loop and went right back to the for loop again. So we'll come down and get the next one. The next file path that we have is avscanner.ini. That happens to be a file that I know does exist in it's not a directory. So based on that, now that I know that I'm dealing with an actual file, and actually the full path of that file path, I'm going to say file size, new variable that I'm going to create, a new object that's going to be a string. Then I want to get the size. And so when I do, it's going to come back and give me 30. I'm sorry, file size comes back as an integer, not as a string. But you'll see that it doesn't matter when we actually add that row to the table. So now we're going to add our first row to the table, because now we actually have a file path and we have a file size. So we want to add that row to the table that we've created. We have to put those in brackets because the PrettyTable requires a list to be able to process it. So I'm going to pass in those two variables, file path, comma, file size, inside square brackets, which represent a list. The number of entries needs to match the number of entries that you've created in the table. If you have too many or too less, you'll get an exception. So now I'm going to hit F6 again to step through, and we're going to process the next file. So the next file happens to be also a file. If I look at file path, it's C:/background JPEG. So I just put a couple of files in here so this would produce some results. So again, I'm going to come through, I'm going to add another row to the table, and I'm going to go back and continue processing, and it'll continue doing this until we exhaust all of the entries that are in file list. Again, Python knows how many entries there are, so as I iterate through those, once we're done, we're going to exit this for loop and come down to the next statement. So I'm going to go ahead and put a breakpoint there because I don't want to walk through every one of the files that's in my root directory. So now what I'm going to do is, if you go back to debug, you can always go hit the F5 key or just click Start Continue in order to continue the script. Okay, now we've actually added all of the rows to the table that were actual files that were in my root directory. So now I can do some other things with the table. So now remember, I'm using the table object, right? So I've got table, and one of the methods within the table object, actually one of the properties, is to be able to, how do I want to align the data within the table? So I'm saying table.align equals L, quote L, end quote. Saying that I want everything in my table to be left aligned. That's the way I like it. You may like it a different way. You want right aligned or center aligned, however you want to do it. It's not required. It'll default, I think, as centered. So the next thing I want to do is, once I've done that, I want to get the resulting string from the table, and I want to get it in a specific way. So again, I'm using the table object that I've created, and I'm using the method getString. You'll notice if you play around with this, you could actually get HTML. There's a bunch of different ways that you can retrieve the output. In this case, I just want a string of the whole table. And I want it sorted by file size. So I want to basically sort my files by file size that are in the table. And I want to do reverse sort. So I want the file with the largest file size to be first as I output my string. So if I hit F6 here, now guess what? Now that I have the string of the entire table, I can print it. So you can see what an advantage using PrettyTable is. So now if I scroll down here, I get exactly what I was expecting. File path, those are all my full paths that I have, and here are the file size. So you see the hyperfile and the page file are large, the swap file is large, and then they get smaller as they go. So basically it sorted the table by file size for me. And when you actually using PrettyTable for different purposes, there may be certain columns that you want to sort by, either in normal manner or in reverse. In other words, standard order or reverse order. So if I didn't put the reverse sort in here, 30 would have been at the top of the list. So that's a great example of how to use PrettyTable to kind of pretty up your output. Now, this is not required right now in any of your assignments, but because I've demonstrated for you and several people have asked how to use it, I wanted to create a briefing, a little demonstration for you here, and giving you a script that actually implements a PrettyTable for you so you can play around with it. So my recommendation is to run this script, step through it, make sure you understand how it works, and then integrate it as you wish, into your own scripts from here on out. Hopefully that was insightful. It's a great library to use to do a lot of different things in order to pretty up your output and to sort that. So have some fun with it.